So we're talking today about how to update your 10-year maintenance plan. Obviously, the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, which we all know that came into being in 2016, prescribes that a body corporate must have a maintenance, repair, and replacement plan. And if you look at the management, the Management Act, you'll note that there are 6 specific requirements that the Act stipulates that needs to happen. We're going to have a quick look at that. A, the major capital items expected to require maintenance, repair, and replacement within the next 10 years. It must present the condition or state of repair of those items. Then the 10-year plan needs to list the components or the items that need to be maintained and repaired. It needs to provide an estimate cost of what is required to be replaced or repaired. It must also provide details of what is the expected lifespan of those components that you are going to repair or replace. And then any other information that's relevant to any capital expenditure or maintenance that's required in the scheme. So it's quite definitive, the Act, in terms of what is required. Use of the reserve fund. You'll note that the items listed there is exactly the same as what the Act requires. But the additional items is as follows, is that plan must be presented at the annual general meeting for approval by the members. So it's quite an interesting point, is that there seems to be confusion sometimes with managing agents, or certainly with trustees, that the plan just needs to be prepared and nobody else needs to participate in the decision making of how to approve that plan. But again, the Act is very, very, very specific in that the plan needs to be presented at the annual general meeting and that the members must approve that plan. So it's not a plan that gets drawn up by the trustees, although the trustees are responsible to have that plan drawn up or draw it up themselves, but the members have to approve it. So that ultimately implies that the plan can actually be amended at the annual general meeting as well. So it's important that that plan is then included in your annual general meeting documents. And we also know that the plan, because it can't be cast in stone. Things change. You know, if you've done a maintenance plan this month, 3 months down the line, something happens in the scheme and that plan needs to be updated. So it's a document that continuously needs to be updated to be relevant. And the same applies to if actual maintenance work is done. The maintenance work needs to be removed from the plan going forward. You can't just continue and leave that maintenance item in the plan for the remainder of the 10 years. And then obviously the annual update of the plan. The whole reason that the plan needs to be updated is because maintenance gets done, new things come to the attention of the trustees and then needs to be budgeted for. The reserve fund forecast. We all know that the reserve fund is directly linked to the maintenance, repair, and replacement plan. But what the Act requires is, and what it says that must be happening in a body corporate, is that a reserve fund must be established and must be separate to the administrative fund. Now we all know that the administrative fund, prior to 2016, a body corporate had one budget, and that budget included all types of maintenance, unless the body corporate obviously was planning to do big repairs like maintenance, painting or redecorating, or let's say paving of the scheme, etc., etc. Those are big ticket items which generally a body corporate wouldn't necessarily have budgeted for in their normal budget prior to 2016, unless they obviously had a long-term plan. So the reserve fund has to be separate from the admin fund. And the purpose obviously of the reserve fund is specifically to plan for the maintenance, repair, and replacement of major capital items. And we're going to chat about major capital items versus just normal maintenance items a little later in the session. We mentioned earlier that the reserve fund plan must be drafted and adjusted annually, and we've just discussed why. Because things change, maintenance gets done, new items come to the foreground that needs to be budgeted for. And then we've got the also which seems to be confusing for lots of people, is that the statutory minimal annual contribution that a body corporate has to comply with. And you'll remember that there's the calculation of using the funds in the scheme at the end of the financial year, and using the budgeted levies in the previous year to determine what the contribution should be in the new year. Now that is extremely important when working out the reserve fund forecast for the body corporate. And we'll also note that at the bottom, the operational expenses are paid out from the admin fund and excluded from the reserve fund planning. And again, we're going to touch on that shortly. Just interesting, I've seen plans personally, and I don't know if you've had this experience where bodies corporates are using their reserve fund forecast or their 10-year maintenance plan for normal operational maintenance, things like doing annual fire extinguisher maintenance, etc. That is obviously something that we're going to chat about soon, and that isn't supposed to be in your reserve fund forecast planning. Why is long-term planning essential? One of the main reasons, obviously, the protection of capital investments. When you buy into a scheme, there's an expectation for your asset to be maintained. So by doing long-term planning, what you are doing, or what the body corporate is doing, is that they're protecting each owner's asset that they've bought. And a lot of people buy that for their retirement, obviously for investments, to put in tenants, to get a return from it. That's extremely important that is done properly. Regular maintenance obviously ensures that is done regularly, and that the value in each person's asset is not depreciated. By doing long-term planning, the body corporate can project what the expenditure is going to be in the next year, in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And that helps with financial planning, which is the next point there. Better financial management allows a scheme to plan for expenditure in the long term and avoiding special levies. We all know that the minute that you say special levies in a body corporate meeting or an AGM, people obviously jump through the roof, because what they don't want to do is suddenly have to fork out 20, 30, 40,000 Rand because of bad financial planning. And better maintenance as well. If you continuously do maintenance, you actually plan for that, what you're ultimately doing is that you're saving the body corporate costs and expenses in the long run. If you know maintenance needs to get done in the next year, the minute you go past that time frame where the maintenance should get done, costs start escalating, because what you're doing now is you're now starting to do retroactive maintenance instead of proactive maintenance. Planned maintenance, we've just mentioned it now again. Finances managed more effectively. The body corporate knows exactly what their financial position is. They can provide detailed information to the members. The members can plan better. They know exactly what their levy expenses are going to be, and they also know what their contributions are towards maintenance. And there's also an expectation. What happens over time is that a body corporate or a building starts deteriorating, the paint starts flaking off, small little cracks appear, there might be spalling problems. And if the body corporate is actually planning for that, then the owners are also aware that they know that there's a contribution towards the maintenance that's going to happen in the next 6 or 12 months, depending on how the body corporate plans for that. And also the costs of planned maintenance. If planned maintenance is done properly and the body corporate adheres to their long-term maintenance plan, ultimately what happens is that the costs are spread over a longer period of time. And again, it goes back to bodies corporate in the olden days, and I'm sure that there are still bodies corporate like that today, that get a knee-jerk reaction, and effectively their hand is forced by deterioration of maintenance to suddenly raise a special levy. Obviously, if the planned maintenance is done properly and the body corporate sticks to that planned maintenance, those costs are then evenly spread over a period of time, and doesn't affect the members or the owners in the scheme financially that much. How to easily update your 10-year plan. Mirfin, as you know, provides a service of a 10-year maintenance plan. And the whole purpose of Mirfin's 10-year maintenance plan is to offer a cost-effective plan for their clients. And for those of you who haven't used Mirfin in the past, just some background about the services offered. The 10-year maintenance plan is based on a light inspection of the common property and key financial parameters provided by the portfolio managers or trustees. And this is extremely important, that this information has to come from the executives stroke trustees, who will obviously ask the managing agent to provide that information. But that information is essential to be able to provide a relevant maintenance plan to the body corporate. A detailed breakdown of the maintenance cost estimate spanning the next 10 years is provided in the plan. And it can only be an estimate, because the cost today is obviously not going to be the same, for instance, if something needs to be replaced in the next 5 or 10 years. But what Mirfin does is that they apply escalation in the costs. And again, going back to plans that I've seen in the industry, is that bodies corporate, and especially it happens when trustees sometimes do it, and this is not a derogatory comment to trustees at all, is that they don't apply an escalation to the cost. So if you're only budgeting 10,000 Rand to do something in year 8, effectively, you're only going to have X amount of money available. The reality is that costs escalate over time, and if you don't build in that escalation into your plan, you're going to be short at the end of that period when you actually need to do the cost. So included in those costs is an escalation. And again, when the plan needs to be updated annually, if costs or escalations have changed, that is an opportune time to then change the escalation going forward. And that's one of the main reasons why it's so important to make sure that your 10-year plan is actually updated every year and continuously from month to month or from quarter to quarter, depending on what work is actually done. The plan is based on assumptions and predictions. It's obviously very, very difficult to be absolutely accurate when doing the plan in terms of exactly when things need to be changed. But the assumptions and predictions are done based on the financial information that's provided by the scheme to Mirfin and their valuers. And obviously what the guys that do the inspection, what they see on site. They can only make assumptions what they see on site. And this further goes to some questions that people ask, is that, obviously it's very, very difficult for anybody, for that matter, to do an assumption or provide estimates for things that actually cannot be seen visibly. If there are structural issues in the structure of the building and it can't be seen because of plaster work or painting over the walls, etc., then obviously an assumption can't be made for that. And again, we're talking about how often you need to update the maintenance plan. The maintenance plan must be seen as a work in progress document, and accordingly, it needs to be updated on a regular basis by either the managing agent, if the trustees want them to do that, or ultimately trustees who are responsible for that 10-year plan. So in providing this service, Mirfin offers a dashboard product, and which allows those people that use the dashboard, and I've just mentioned other trustees and probably the managing agents, access to the system and to easily update the information as they go through the year, as maintenance is done or moved, from one year to the next, or actual expenditure has been incurred. If you've budgeted 10,000 Rand for a specific item, let's make it a bigger amount, 100,000 Rand, and the cost was only 80,000 Rand, then you're actually able to go and update that report on the dashboard. And what that does is the system, because it's a self-calculating system, the system will automatically recalculate things like, for instance, what the contributions will be to the levies, to the reserve fund, which is very, very helpful when you're actually doing that calculation. A lot of people are using Excel spreadsheets, which can become very, very complicated if you're not very proficient with it and don't know how to use all the formulas. So the dashboard system, again, it's a self-calculating dashboard. You can update any information as and when required, and the system will then automatically update or provide information based on your calculations or your adjustments that you've made. And one of the clever things about this dashboard is, and there's a lot of thinking and thought and design that's gone into this dashboard, is that the entire calculation, the dashboard, takes in consideration the legal requirements and what the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act and the Sectional Title Act requires of a body corporate to do. Things like, for instance, interest that needs to be calculated on reserve funds that the body corporate already has. By putting in the percentage of that and providing the information how much money is available to the scheme, the system automatically calculates that. So it would need minimal input up front, but once you've put that information in there, the system automatically kicks that out. You'll see on the screen now is just a screen grab of a maintenance plan. So this would be an example of the dashboard. Excuse me. And you can easily see that, obviously this is not live, so I can't go and click on them, but you can easily see all the information that you can put into this dashboard or this specific plan. Estimate maintenance cost today, when last it was maintained, what is the lifespan expectancy of that specific item. Let's look at the top one, the wiring. There's a 70-year expectation. When is the next maintenance plan planned for what year would that be? So all this information can be changed according to your body corporate requirements. So we don't have too much other information or screen grabs on this, but on this matter, just so you guys are aware, and I've mentioned it again, is that if you want to have training on the maintenance plan or how to use the dashboard, Mirfin provides a free 30-minute session with you on a one-on-one. So if you guys are interested, if you want to learn how to use that dashboard more efficiently, you're more than welcome to email Mirfin at info@mirfin.co.za and request a free session, training session for yourself, trustees, or for your property managers. Earlier in the session, I talked about the reserve fund expense versus the admin fund expense. And this is quite an interesting topic because, as I mentioned, I've seen maintenance plans where normal operational maintenance, like for instance, replacement of bulbs, annual servicing of fire equipment, is actually put into the maintenance plan. And certainly in my mind, and I'd be very happy to see your comments on this, obviously that is not the intention of the plan to put in normal operational expenses. So we look at major capital items. The Sectional Title Schemes Management Act talks about the maintenance, repair and replacement plan to include major capital items. And these items will be paid from the body corporate's reserve fund account. And we've already touched on that. There's a calculation that needs to get done, and that money needs to be transferred into a separate bank account specifically for this purpose. Any other maintenance work, replacement of lights in the passages, for instance, irregular, let's say, electrical fence, or maybe the gates or the locks need to be replaced. Those are normal operational expenditure, and obviously must be paid from the normal administrative fund, and not from the reserve fund account. Capital expenditure. What is capital expenditure? When we talk about that, how do you define that? Capital expenditure adds growth or value to assets and are allocated to the reserve fund. These are not normal maintenance items, as we mentioned, small little items, replacing the locks of the gates, etc., etc. The major capital items is identified when you look at what your maintenance items should be in your 10-year plan, and they are supposed to add growth or value to the assets of the body corporate. Operational expenses are generally defined. They reduce the body corporate's income and are allocated or paid from the admin fund. So the body corporate will collect its normal levies every month, and it will pay expenses. Included in those expenses will be repairs and maintenance costs, and that will reduce the normal funds that are in the administrative funds. It doesn't reduce the funds in the major capital funds, because those funds in your reserve fund is specifically earmarked for big projects that the body corporate has planned for. But what happens when you have unexpected maintenance work? What happens regularly in body corporate schemes is that there's a budget, and as detailed as you want to make that budget, there's always going to be something that jumps out that you haven't prepared for. So what happens when you have unexpected maintenance work? What do you do? So you either have routine versus preventative maintenance. So immediate repairs that are deemed to be temporary repairs obviously prevents further deterioration. So you find yourself in a position that something urgent comes up, but because the body corporate doesn't necessarily have the sufficient funds, they decide to just repair it for the meantime until they actually have or can make other arrangements to actually have the item that's been repaired temporarily properly replaced, and then obviously prolong the asset and its lifespan. It's important to consider here is that the trustees are extremely important in this decision. And this is something that the managing agent is not responsible for. Again, the trustees need to be involved in the process of identifying maintenance items, either short-term operational expenses, maintenance, or long-term where the reserve fund comes into play. And this is where the trustees have to give the necessary time and attention to when they're planning every year for the maintenance plan and their budgeting process. Because if certain assets need to replace to prolong the lifespan of an item, then obviously you're probably going to look at putting that in your maintenance plan and not in your normal admin budget where you pay from your normal funds that you collect. What are the characteristics of major capital maintenance items? It generally involves major repairs, overhauls or replacement, occurring in variable intervals. In other words, it's not a routine maintenance thing that gets done. Obviously, we know that, for instance, the most common one is when the building is redecorated, it's repainted. That's not a routine thing. It doesn't happen every month. It doesn't happen every 6 months. It happens generally 5 to 8, maybe sometimes even 10 years, depending on how good the paint supply or the paint that you used was and the contractor that did the work. Sorry, it also, major capital maintenance, it's mandatory. In other words, it's not optional. It has to be done. And it has to be done because you put in your maintenance plan and you plan for that, you budget for that. Funds are collected over a period of time. And when it becomes time, even if it's 5 or 6 or 7 years from now, if the trustees are doing their job correctly, then they will have to do that because it's mandatory, it's in their maintenance plan. Generally speaking, you would need skilled contractor. It will be a project. Again, talking about redecoration of a building, we all know that that can be quite an expensive exercise. But again, there's planning involved. You might have a project manager that's involved who then oversees the contractor. The contractor won't just be the guy next door that says that he can paint. It will actually be a contractor that's been sourced in the industry, that's got a track record of actually being able to paint properly, to prepare and do repairs. And when you start talking about redecoration of properties or buildings, when you start talking about spalling repairs, then you need to make sure that you use the right people that can actually do spalling. The same with asbestos. All the buildings that got to have asbestos roofs or have asbestos water tanks. You've got to be a specialist contractor to actually be able to work on those, and you've got to be certified. It's not every contractor that can work with asbestos. So those are the characteristics, generally speaking, of when we're talking about major capital maintenance. And you can see, if you look at that list, we're not talking about the property manager phoning the locksmith down the road to come and replace the locks, or the plumber quickly coming to the building because there's a leaking tap or there's a broken pipe. We're talking about proper consideration being given to various quotes, project managers, contractors that are the right kind of contractor for the job that's at hand. So ultimately, what are we talking about when we talk about the 10-year maintenance? What is the purpose or the intention of the 10-year maintenance plan? And you'll note there that it provides organized guidelines to the body corporate. And when we say the body corporate, the members, because remember, again, the 10-year maintenance plan has to be approved by the members at an AGM. So it's important that those people are involved in the decision making, but it provides guidelines for those people to make sufficient decisions. It sustains the performance of assets in the scheme, in the building. It mitigates further deterioration of assets by doing regular maintenance as and when required. And that maintenance can be on an annual basis. It just depends on what you deem to be a major capital expenditure versus just a normal operational expense. And it's very important to also consider this, is that when this decision is made, what to put into your admin fund or your admin budget versus your maintenance reserve fund or budget, is that ultimately everything that you do will affect the levies that the owners pay. And that's why the planning is so essential. And I really don't think that trustees take it seriously enough when they are planning for body corporate's budget, even if it's just for the next 12 months. It's very important that happens, because it ultimately affects every single person that's in that body corporate. Because the only place where you can get the funds is from the people through the levies. Again, the 10-year maintenance plan, the purpose or the intention is that you get the maximum lifespan out of the assets in your scheme. Let's talk about, use a generator as an example. A generator will have a certain period or lifespan. It might be quite long, but if the normal maintenance is not done to that generator as and when required, you will find yourself in a position where that generator is not going to work, and you suddenly sit with a massive expense which the body corporate hasn't made provision for. Ensures maintenance is carried out before significant component failure. Again, using the example of the generator, if that's done on a regular basis, you won't find yourself in a position where the asset has actually now terminated and you don't have an immediate answer to repairing that. And then the last one, they focus primarily on the preservation of existing assets. Again, it's like anything. If you've got a car, you take your car in for a service every 20 or 25,000 kilometers. If you keep on doing that and you don't, and then your car will obviously last for quite a long time. So you're preserving your assets by doing the maintenance on a regular basis. And it's important to understand, there's been some question, we're going to look at some questions and answers now. Some people have asked, do you need to update your maintenance plan in the next 10 years? And obviously you need to do that. Once you've done your maintenance on a specific asset in the scheme, you need to start planning for when it needs to get done again. It's almost like, I call it it's a rolling plan, because every time that you've done something, you need to start thinking about when you need to do it again. It doesn't suddenly stop just because you've done it and it was put in the maintenance plan. And again, that's why it's important to also use professionals when doing this. I know that the Act requires the trustees to be responsible for this, but I don't think trustees will do anything wrong if they use third parties to assist them with even the initial plan and then the annual plan thereafter. It's extremely important to use people that actually know the planning of these items. So we've had some questions from some participants prior to today's session. We're just going to go through some of them, and hopefully some of them will, if you've got a question, might actually answer your question that you might have had. So the first question we have is, does one apply today's costs throughout the 10-year plan, or does one need to take inflation into account? And I've touched on this again. The answer is no. You can't assume that the 10,000 Rand that you're planning for today is going to be the same in 5 years' time. So you do need to apply an escalation. Inflation, I can't really say that inflation is necessarily the right escalation. There are certain expenses or costs that escalate differently to inflation. They might be more or less. But I think the short answer is that you do need to apply an escalation over the period of the 10-year plan. You can't just use the same figure and assume that the cost today will be the same as tomorrow. Next question we had is, if a 10-year maintenance plan was done in 2017, will this be sufficient for the full 10-year period? Will it then need to be renewed in the 9th year, or must the plan be updated every year? So let's start at the bottom part. The plan needs to be updated every year. We know this. And the reason why is that because the plan needs to be submitted to the annual general meeting for the members to be approved. And it doesn't make sense to put the same plan every year if maintenance has actually been done. The plan needs to be updated. So the answer there is yes, the plan needs to be updated on an annual basis. The 10-year plan was done in 2017. Will this be sufficient for the full 10-year period? Well, that really depends on what is actually in that 10-year plan. But the assumption is that that 10-year plan will make provision for a couple of items. And those items are not necessarily all required to be maintained or done in the same time. So again, it wouldn't be sufficient, because if you've done maintenance and you've updated your plan, then obviously the answer is no, your plan won't be sufficient for the full 10-year period. Does Mirfin offer training on the 10-year maintenance plan? Yes. I mentioned earlier, if you are interested or you want a one-on-one session, Mirfin provides a 30-minute free training session for you on the maintenance plan and how to use the dashboard, and just shows you how fantastic that system is and how easily it is to use, and how automatically it will update the plan as you go along, and you enter all the necessary information. So info@mirfin.co.za. Please get in touch with the admin guys, and they will make contact with you and set up a session with you. Quite an interesting question that somebody asked. Can we submit our annual financial statements to you? The answer is no, because the annual financial statements, you must understand, is that Mirfin is not involved in the running or the management of this scheme. The annual financial statements might have certain items or line items in there, or it might actually not have sufficient information for Mirfin to actually perform their function sufficiently. So, although the financial statements or financial information is important when Mirfin, before Mirfin takes on a maintenance plan project on behalf of the body corporate, that information there's certain information that Mirfin would require that is important to them. But to provide your financial statements for Mirfin to then try and dissect what is actually in those financial statements is really not going to be any help for Mirfin or for the body corporate. So the question obviously being answered is that no, that wouldn't really help us. So please don't do that. Thanks. How long does it take to complete the 10-year plan? Once Mirfin has been on site and they've done their initial assessment, it takes anything between 4 and 7 days for you before you receive your maintenance plan. And I think that's a pretty quick turnaround time. Obviously, you do need to understand is that Mirfin can only start once they've obviously got the information that they've requested up front. So, but once they've been on site, they've done their assessment, anything between 4 and 7 days before you get your plan. Will anybody have access to the dashboard? Yes, so once you have appointed Mirfin to do your 10-year maintenance plan, you will receive a PDF document, and with that you receive a unique code. That code you will then use to access the dashboard when you go onto the Mirfin website. So not anybody has access to that. You'll have to use the code, but once you have that code, then yes, you will have access to that. Does the maintenance plan take existing maintenance issues into consideration? When Mirfin does their on-site, they can only report on what they see on site. So yes, the answer is yes, they will take existing maintenance issues into consideration, but they obviously can't make certain assumptions that something might fail in the next year or 2 years or 3 years. If the maintenance plan is updated on an annual basis and it becomes apparent at that time that maintenance is required for a specific item or asset in the scheme, then yes, then that will be reported on. But at the time, if they went on site today, they will report on what they see at the scheme today. Does the maintenance plan include photographs? Yes. Every maintenance plan includes photographs of the assets and what has been seen on site. And that's obviously very relevant for the scheme, because that becomes a record of how certain assets looked in the scheme at a certain point in time. And it also is quite a valuable tool for property managers and for the trustees to actually plan ahead. If 6 months down the line or 9 months down the line, if the trustees start planning for the next financial year and they have to look at their 10-year maintenance plan, for them to revert back to those photographs is very helpful. And they can then see, well, this is how it looked in 6 months' time compared to how it looks today. And then they can make a quite an informed decision as to how they want to deal with the maintenance going forward. How much does Mirfin charge for a 10-year maintenance plan? So there isn't a fixed amount. That's why you need to get a quotation from us, and you go to www.mirfin.co.za and you click on request a quote or quotation. Mirfin will provide a quotation for the specific scheme that you are inquiring for. And once you have that quotation, obviously you will then submit that to your trustees for approval. So just some other questions that we've had that we've received during the session. The question is, capital expenditure was mentioned, but no mention of this in the Act with regards to reserve fund, capital expenditure. So capital expenditure obviously relates to what we've spoken about, the 10-year maintenance plan. The 10-year maintenance plan specifically requires capital expenditure to be considered. And if you go and look at the Act is actually very specific when it says what items are supposed to be earmarked as capital expenditure. The reserve fund is linked to your maintenance plan. Once you have your maintenance plan and you've got an estimate of costs, you will then adjust or make provision for that in your reserve fund. And that's why these two items are connected. The capital expenditure is directly connected to your 10-year maintenance plan, and your 10-year maintenance plan effectively gives rise to the calculation of what needs to be put into your reserve fund. I hope that answers the question. Next question we had, how can a trustee access the dashboard? We've just touched on that. If a body corporate has received a report, in other words, they've gone through the process of getting a quotation, paying the invoice, the assessment is done on site, and Mirfin has sent you the 10-year maintenance plan in PDF, at that time, you will get a unique code, and that code can then be used for that, if it is a trustee, to access the dashboard. Another question we had, what if you don't have many major capital items when the building is still new? Well, obviously, then there is nothing to be put into the maintenance plan. Just remember that the maintenance plan is there for long-term maintenance. So you might even get a situation where, even in a new scheme, that over time, if painting of a building, everybody pretty much knows that anything between 5 and 10 years needs to transpire before a building is painted. So even if a scheme was built today, or 6 months ago, or 12 months ago, you know that you probably need to repaint that building in 8 years' time. So your 10-year plan, remember the maintenance plan is for 10 years. So you would then make provision for painting the building in 8 years' time. But you need to start calculating what your contribution today needs to be, so that when you get to 8 years, you then have sufficient money in the bank to pay that. So irrespective of the fact that the building, there might not be any major capital items over the next 3, 4, 5 years, at some point in time over the next 10 years, there will be. And in order to have the money at that time, you need to start planning for that now. So that's quite important to consider that. And bodies corporate don't necessarily always think about that. They think, well, we don't have to do anything next 5 years, so we're not going to put any money away. That is probably the worst decision that you can make. You need to put the money away today to pay for the expense in the future, considering escalations, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very good question, a very good point to consider. Another question we had: how are members involved in decision making of 10-year maintenance plan in practice? What is reasonable? Excuse me. So how are the members involved? So the maintenance plan, as we know, needs to be prepared by the trustees. How they do that, either the managing agent or a third party or themselves, it then gets presented at the annual general meeting. The reason for that is because obviously the owners are going to contribute to the funds that needs to be accumulated over time for that maintenance. And I think the answer really here is that it really depends on, the involvement of the members in the scheme. We all know that bodies corporates always struggle with having an AGM because there's never a quorum. Doesn't matter how big or small the scheme is, people just don't have the appetite or not interested in dealing with an AGM and dealing with sometimes a lot of conflict or confrontation. So to try and answer this, my opinion is that if you have members that are interested in the assets and are interested in the financial well-being of a scheme, the way that they get involved is to actually look at the maintenance plan when they receive it with the annual general meeting documents, and to actually ask the relevant questions to the trustees. Or, if a third party was used to prepare the plan, it's a good idea for the trustees to actually invite those people to the meeting. So because they have more intricate answers or possible answers to questions, but for the owners to actually take an active interest and to actually ask, but why did you only budget 100,000 Rand? Or why did you not budget 100,000 Rand? Or why are we doing it next year instead of not this year, et cetera, et cetera. So that is where owners can get involved. Unfortunately, if those questions are not asked at the AGMs, then obviously then there will never be an involvement from the members. How people can also get involved is, trustees are entitled to create subcommittees, and they can actually get owners, even though they're not trustees, to be involved in this process. So that's another way for members to get involved. I don't think this really happens quite a lot. Personally, I don't think that trustees really understand how important this part is of their role and responsibilities in the scheme. But to try and answer the question, that would be one. The last question, we're going to second last question, I think. Please give more examples of capital maintenance, for example, painting, refurb, swimming pools. So another example would be the replacement of the roof. Obviously a roof, we all know, is quite a sturdy piece of equipment and asset. It doesn't necessarily always needs to be replaced, but that's another example. Another example will be the refurb or the modernization of a lift. And we all know that a lift generally has a lifespan of about 40 years. So there's a lot of involvement in terms of planning for that. Lifts don't unfortunately work forever. So that would be another example. Roof, lifts, you could even find boundary walls or security fencing, security systems, where buildings have A-phones or have intercom systems. That could be an extremely costly exercise for a body corporate to replace. So that would be another example of that. Another question we had: what if you don't have much major items? The building is still new. I think we've touched on that already. We touched on that as well. How do you obtain realistic estimated costs for the identified items? Okay, so this is obviously a question related specifically to Mirfin. So the answer on that is that we do an estimate based on our professional experience, but the onus is on the body corporate to obtain quotes from specialist contractors and update the dashboard accordingly. So just to maybe put that in layman's terms, obviously we've mentioned this, is that Mirfin will do an assessment and provide figures on what they see on site and from their experience as professionals. But if the body corporate at any time during their 10-year maintenance plan, when the body corporate gets to the point of actually having to do the major capital expenditure, let's say for instance the redecoration of the building, to just assume that the estimate of, let's say, 500,000 Rand is sufficient would not really be a very clever thing to do. So at that time, the body corporate must then go through the process of getting specifications drawn up, going out to tender, getting 3, 4, 5 quotations, and then obviously assess those quotations, in terms of what their financial position is. So you might find that that 500,000 Rand is maybe a little bit more than what they need, or it might be a little bit less, but it is extremely important for the body corporate and the trustees at the time when they need to do or attend to the major capital expenditure to get the necessary quotes, and then to deal with the maintenance on that point. Here's a question, which is quite an interesting question, from Marika. She asked, what about geysers? If it is an old building where the geysers are still on the roofs and the BC wants to move them all? So the answer would be geysers repairs should fall under admin fund expenses. So normal repairs you would know that of the body corporate insurance does cover certain maintenance to geysers. And again, that is as a preventative long-term maintenance initiative. Not necessarily all policies cover that, but normal maintenance would come out of the admin fund. If the body corporate wanted to move the geysers out of the roof, and I'm not sure where they would specifically go and put it, obviously there would need to be another place to put that. Depending on how big the scheme is, you might find that becomes quite a costly exercise. So you could possibly argue that because it is a big expense, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 apartments, and you're going to move all those geysers, that expense is much better suited for the reserve, for the maintenance plan. So if you plan for that over a period of time, you save the money to actually do that. But just generally speaking, it should be part of your admin fund. Keith asked, where does unpaid levies fall in the whole question of maintenance reserves and admin levies? Well, to answer the question, it doesn't really fall into anything there. You can't plan for that. Owners are supposed to pay their levies irrespective on the first day of every month. We all know that, but we all understand that life is real and people fall onto hard times and they're not able to pay their levies. But ultimately, those levies are still payable. The body corporate is either going to get into a situation where they go to CSOs to collect the levies, or they're going to employ an attorney to collect the levies from those owners. I guess the question really is that if people don't pay the levies and their contribution towards the reserve fund is not collected, what does the body corporate do? Obviously a body corporate always has the option to go to a third party or an external company to obtain financing, which they are entitled to do, but they need to get approval from the owners. In the olden days, the trustees could just do that on their own, but now you need to go to the owners to collect that money. It's obviously quite a long process, not necessarily ideal, because you might find, you have to pay back the money with interest, and owners are obviously generally adverse to paying interest on money. So, ideally you want to just make sure that you collect the money and the body corporate doesn't sit in a situation where it can't actually do its maintenance, long-term maintenance planning because owners haven't paid. But I think, with the whole 10-year maintenance plan, because you're planning ahead, 2, 3 years, 4 years ahead, a body corporate, if it's run sufficiently and well and efficiently by the trustees and the managing agent, that they shouldn't get into a situation where this is problematic. Antoinette asked, if we already have a 10-year maintenance plan done by a professional building consultant, can Mirfin use it to make a new assessment, or do they start from scratch? So the answer on this is generally yes, but it depends on the format and quality of the existing 10-year plan. So I think if you do have an existing 10-year maintenance plan, and you want Mirfin to look at it, or maybe to redo it for you, or put it onto their dashboard system, my best suggestion is to, again, email info@mirfin.co.za, and one of our skillful admin people will contact you and have the discussion with you. But yes, Mirfin has in the past taken over 10-year maintenance plans, put it onto Mirfin's dashboard system, and then provided the client with the dashboard access, which is obviously a great system to use because it can be passed on. I'm just going to last question. Do you have a different levels of access to dashboard? Some users may only view. The answer is no. Access is best granted only to those that are appointed to dealing with a 10-year plan. So if your managing agent has requested the 10-year plan, and the 10-year plan is sent to the property manager, and then obviously that property manager will have access code to access the dashboard system. So we dealt with that during the session, is that it's not available to every single person or everybody that wants to have access to it. There's a specific code that you have to use. All right, guys, if there's anything else that we can help you with, again, the email info@mirfin.co.za. Thank you very much for your time. I hope it was helpful, and have a good weekend.